It began as a routine financial review inside Kensington Palace, one that was never supposed to leave the room. Yet within hours, whispers were racing through royal corridors. Prince William had reportedly authorized a decision so explosive that even senior courtiers were left stunned. By sunset, one name dominated every private conversation inside the monarchy: Camilla. And at the center of it all stood three royal children, whose future had suddenly changed forever. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, those closest to the palace dismissed the rumors as nothing more than another wave of speculation. Financial reviews happened all the time. Trustees met regularly. Advisors examined reports, budgets, and allocations behind closed doors. That was normal. What was not normal, however, was the level of secrecy surrounding this particular meeting. According to growing whispers from inside royal circles, the gathering had been arranged quietly, attended only by a small group of trusted figures, and protected by an unusual level of discretion that immediately raised questions among palace staff. Prince William reportedly sat at the center of the discussions alongside Catherine and several senior trustees responsible for overseeing long-term royal financial planning. What began as a routine review soon took a dramatic turn when attention allegedly shifted toward long-standing income arrangements that few people ever expected to be questioned. The atmosphere inside the room reportedly changed almost instantly. Advisors who arrived expecting a standard review suddenly found themselves examining matters with far-reaching consequences. The deeper they looked, the more uncomfortable the conversation became. As the hours passed, reports suggest that several funding streams connected to Camilla became the focus of increasingly intense scrutiny. No official details emerged, but insiders would later claim that concerns had been building quietly for months. Some believed the review was simply part of William's broader effort to modernize financial oversight. Others suspected something much bigger was unfolding behind the scenes. Whatever the truth, one thing became impossible to ignore. The discussion was no longer about numbers alone. It was about priorities, legacy, and the future direction of the monarchy itself. Outside the meeting room, uncertainty spread quickly. Staff members noticed unusual movements among advisors. Courtiers exchanged nervous glances. Conversations stopped abruptly whenever unfamiliar faces entered the room. Those who had spent years navigating royal politics understood that moments like these rarely happened without a reason. Something significant was being debated, and everyone seemed to sense it. Then came the moment that fueled even more speculation. Catherine was reportedly seen leaving alongside trust advisors after the meeting concluded. Observers described her expression as serious and focused, the look of someone carrying the weight of information that could not yet be shared publicly. Within hours, rumors began spreading throughout royal circles that the discussions had involved Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis directly. At first, many dismissed those claims as exaggerated gossip. Yet the whispers refused to disappear. Instead, they grew louder. By evening, the mood across royal households had noticeably shifted. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Why were the children suddenly connected to a financial review? Why were long-established arrangements being examined now? And why did so many insiders appear convinced that William had already made a decision? The uncertainty created a sense of anticipation that seemed to hang over every conversation. Even those with no direct knowledge of the meeting sensed that a major turning point was approaching. What nobody realized at that moment was that the review had uncovered information capable of reshaping relationships, redefining priorities, and altering the balance of influence inside the royal family. The whispers that began that morning were only the first tremors of a much larger earthquake waiting beneath the surface, one that would soon place William, Catherine, Camilla, and the future generation of royals at the center of a controversy unlike anything the palace had faced in years. But the financial review was only the beginning, because hidden inside the royal accounts was a discovery that would trigger one of the most dramatic power shifts in recent memory. For years, certain royal financial arrangements operated quietly behind closed doors, rarely attracting public attention. But according to growing reports, one particular stream of income had become the focus of intense scrutiny. What appeared untouchable was suddenly being questioned, and the answers being uncovered were raising uncomfortable questions about the future direction of the monarchy. The rumors surrounding the private review refused to fade. Instead, they expanded into something far larger than anyone had anticipated. What had started as whispered speculation about a confidential meeting soon evolved into a deeper investigation into the financial foundations supporting some of the most powerful figures within the royal household. At the center of those discussions stood Queen Camilla, and a series of long-established arrangements that for years had reportedly operated without significant challenge. Those familiar with royal finances often described such arrangements as part of the institution itself, woven into traditions that stretched back decades. They existed quietly in the background, rarely discussed publicly, and almost never questioned internally. Their purpose, supporters argued, was stability. Their critics, however, increasingly viewed them as relics of an older system struggling to adapt to a rapidly changing monarchy. That conflict between preservation and reform had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Now, it appeared ready to erupt. As reports continued to emerge, attention focused on income streams allegedly connected to Camilla's position within the royal structure. While details remained closely guarded, insiders suggested that advisors had begun examining whether existing arrangements still reflected the priorities of a modern institution preparing for the next generation. The review was no longer simply about finances. It was becoming a debate about values, responsibility, and the future identity of the crown itself. At the same time, Prince William's role within royal operations had been steadily expanding. No longer viewed merely as the future king, he had increasingly become a central decision-maker in matters involving long-term planning and institutional oversight. Those close to the palace reportedly described a prince determined to strengthen foundations rather than simply inherit them. That mindset placed him at the heart of conversations many previous heirs may have avoided altogether. The deeper advisors looked into inheritance structures and future obligations, the more complicated the situation became. Questions that once seemed theoretical suddenly demanded real answers. How should resources be allocated in a monarchy preparing for generational transition? What obligations existed toward future heirs? And perhaps most importantly, should long-standing privileges remain untouched simply because they had existed for years? Behind closed doors, these questions reportedly sparked intense debate. Some advisors argued passionately for modernization, insisting that reforms were necessary to ensure stability for decades to come. Others warned against moving too quickly, believing that tradition itself was one of the monarchy's greatest strengths. The discussions became increasingly difficult because both sides believed they were protecting the institution. One side sought change to secure the future. The other feared change might weaken the very foundations that had sustained the crown for generations. As tensions grew, so did the sense that something extraordinary was unfolding. Every new review appeared to uncover another layer of complexity. Every answer seemed to generate even more questions. What initially looked like a simple examination of financial arrangements was transforming into a much larger struggle over influence, legacy, and control. The stakes were no longer measured merely in numbers, but in the future direction of the royal family itself. And amid all the uncertainty, one realization began emerging with startling clarity. The decisions being discussed were not solely about present circumstances. They were connected to plans that stretched years into the future. They reflected promises, priorities, and responsibilities that had been quietly taking shape long before this controversy ever reached public attention. That growing realization would soon shift the entire conversation away from financial records and towards something far more personal, a commitment William had reportedly carried with him for years, one that would soon become impossible to ignore. As investigators dug deeper into the numbers, attention quickly shifted from the present to a promise William had made years earlier. Long before this controversy erupted, William was already thinking about the future. Friends and insiders often described him as a father first and a future king second. That perspective would become crucial when difficult choices suddenly appeared on his desk, forcing him to decide exactly where royal resources should go. As speculation surrounding the financial review intensified, a different narrative began emerging beneath the headlines. While many observers focused on questions of money and influence, those closest to William reportedly viewed the situation through an entirely different lens. For them, this was never simply about shifting figures between accounts or restructuring long-standing arrangements. It was about protecting the next generation. It was about ensuring that the monarchy William would eventually inherit remained strong enough to support the family he was raising. For years, insiders had quietly described William as someone deeply focused on long-term stability. Unlike the dramatic conflicts that often captured public attention, his concerns allegedly centered on issues that would not fully reveal their importance for decades. He was said to think constantly about the responsibilities waiting for Prince George, the expectations that would eventually fall upon Princess Charlotte, and the unique challenges Prince Louis would face as part of a rapidly evolving royal institution. Those concerns shaped nearly every major decision connected to the future. Catherine reportedly shared that same outlook. Together, they were often described as approaching royal life through the perspective of parents rather than public figures. Behind the scenes, discussions about the future allegedly revolved around security, opportunity, education, and stability. The goal was not merely to preserve tradition, but to ensure that future generations could carry those traditions without being overwhelmed by them. That shared vision gradually became one of the strongest influences guiding their decision-making. As advisors continued examining financial structures, conversations increasingly returned to the same question. What responsibilities did the current generation have toward those who would inherit the crown in the future? The answer was not simple. Every choice carried consequences. Every decision affected not only the present but decades yet to come. That reality created enormous pressure on William, as reports and recommendations continued arriving from every direction. According to palace whispers, discussions eventually expanded beyond immediate concerns and into broader plans for long-term support systems. Educational initiatives reportedly became a central topic. Charitable opportunities connected to future royal responsibilities were allegedly explored. Advisors examined ways to create structures capable of supporting George, Charlotte, and Louis throughout their lives while also strengthening the institution they would one day represent. What began as financial planning slowly transformed into a conversation about legacy itself. At the center of these discussions stood the concept of a children's royal legacy fund. Though details remained surrounded by secrecy, reports suggested that planners had begun exploring ways to secure resources that could benefit future generations while aligning with William's vision of responsible stewardship. Supporters viewed the idea as a forward-looking investment in stability. Critics questioned whether such changes risked disrupting established traditions. The debate grew increasingly intense because both sides believed they were defending the monarchy's future. Yet, through all the disagreements, one principle reportedly remained constant. William's focus never drifted far from his children. Every recommendation was measured against its potential impact on the generation that would eventually inherit today's decisions. Every proposal was evaluated through the lens of responsibility rather than convenience. That approach earned admiration from some and criticism from others, but it also revealed the deeper motivation driving the entire controversy. As weeks of discussions unfolded, it became increasingly clear that the financial review was only one chapter in a much larger story. Behind the numbers stood competing visions for the future. Behind every recommendation stood questions about loyalty, influence, and power. And while William remained focused on safeguarding what came next, forces elsewhere within the royal household were becoming increasingly unsettled by the direction events appeared to be taking. Yet while William was focused on the future, another battle was unfolding behind palace walls, and it involved Camilla herself. What made the situation even more explosive was the timing. Reports suggest that relationships inside the royal household had already become increasingly strained. As discussions intensified, Camilla allegedly found herself facing resistance from figures who once remained silent, creating an atmosphere unlike anything seen since the early days of Charles's reign. By the time whispers of financial restructuring began spreading through royal circles, tensions had already been building beneath the surface for months. To the outside world, the monarchy continued, presenting an image of stability and continuity. Behind closed doors, however, insiders claimed a very different reality was unfolding. Conversations had become more cautious. Alliances were shifting. Long-standing assumptions about influence and authority were quietly being challenged. The financial review did not create those tensions, it simply exposed them. According to growing reports, disagreements among senior royal figures had become increasingly difficult to ignore. What began as subtle differences in priorities gradually evolved into competing visions for the monarchy's future. Some believed the institution needed to adapt more aggressively to changing times. Others favored preserving existing structures that had served the crown for generations. The conflict was not always open, but it was becoming impossible to conceal. Every major discussion seemed to reveal another fault line beneath the surface. At the center of that uncertainty stood Camilla. For years, her position within the royal household had appeared secure. Yet insiders increasingly whispered that resistance was emerging from unexpected places. Individuals who once avoided challenging established arrangements were allegedly beginning to question them. Advisors who had traditionally remained neutral were reportedly voicing concerns. The atmosphere around key decisions felt different, now less predictable, more cautious, and increasingly difficult to control. Those changes did not go unnoticed. Reports suggest that several of Camilla's closest supporters became deeply concerned as influence within palace circles appeared to shift. The growing focus on future generations, institutional reform, and long-term planning seemed to be strengthening voices that favored change. Each new discussion appeared to reinforce the perception that the monarchy was entering a new phase, one in which traditional assumptions could no longer be taken for granted. At the same time, William's authority continued expanding. What made his rise particularly significant was not merely the power he held, but the confidence with which others increasingly looked to him for leadership. Advisors reportedly viewed him as someone preparing not for the next news cycle, but for the next several decades. That long-term approach earned respect among many within royal operations, further increasing his influence during critical discussions. As a result, debates that once might have been settled quietly were now receiving far greater scrutiny. The possibility of financial restructuring only intensified those divisions. Some insiders allegedly welcomed the idea, viewing it as a necessary step toward modernization. Others feared it could trigger wider changes that would reshape established balances within the royal household. Every rumor generated fresh speculation. Every meeting seemed to produce more uncertainty. What had begun as an internal review was evolving into a struggle over who would ultimately define the monarchy's future. As pressure mounted, emotions reportedly grew stronger on all sides. Supporters of reform believed the institution stood at a historic crossroads. Defenders of tradition worried that decades of precedent could be swept aside. The debates became increasingly personal because they touched on questions far larger than finances. They involved legacy, influence, and the future role of those closest to the crown. Then, just as uncertainty reached its highest point, events took an unexpected turn. Behind closed doors, a meeting was scheduled involving key figures whose decisions would shape everything that followed. Those present reportedly understood the significance of the moment before a single word was spoken. By the time the discussions concluded, the atmosphere surrounding the controversy had changed forever. What had previously been speculation was about to become something much more consequential. Then came the meeting that insiders now describe as the turning point, the moment everything changed. Behind closed doors, a decision was finally reached. According to palace whispers, documents were reviewed, advisors consulted, and approvals quietly secured. What followed was a move so unexpected that even veteran royal observers struggled to believe it at first. Yet once the details began emerging, the shockwaves were impossible to contain. For weeks, rumors had swirled around meetings, reviews, and confidential discussions, but very few people anticipated how dramatically events would unfold. The atmosphere surrounding the monarchy had already become charged with uncertainty. Every conversation seemed to point toward change. Every private consultation appeared to move the institution closer to a crossroads. Then, according to growing reports from palace insiders, the moment of decision finally arrived. Sources claimed that William had spent considerable time weighing recommendations from advisors and trustees before reaching a conclusion. The pressure was immense. Whatever choice emerged would not simply affect financial structures. It would send a message about priorities, leadership, and the future direction of the royal family. That reality reportedly made every discussion more intense, and every recommendation more consequential. Then came the decision that would dominate royal conversations for days. According to persistent palace whispers, William authorized a transfer involving resources that had become the subject of intense scrutiny throughout the review process. The move allegedly received support from trustees after extensive consultations and legal examinations. While official confirmation remained absent, insiders described a process that moved from debate to approval with remarkable speed once the final decision had been reached. What stunned observers most was not merely the transfer itself, but its reported destination. According to accounts circulating within royal circles, the beneficiary would be a trust connected to George, Charlotte, and Louis. Suddenly, months of speculation about future generations seemed to make sense. What many had initially viewed as a financial controversy was now being reframed as a long-term investment in the monarchy's next chapter. The implications were enormous. Reports suggest that Catherine was informed almost immediately after the arrangements received final approval. Those familiar with the situation described the development as one of the most significant moments in the broader effort to strengthen the future foundations of the royal family. For Catherine, whose focus had reportedly remained centered on stability and long-term planning, the decision represented more than a financial adjustment. It symbolized the realization of priorities that had shaped countless private discussions over the years. The speed of events left many courtiers struggling to process what had happened. Some reportedly expected prolonged negotiations, additional reviews, or further delays. Instead, what had appeared uncertain one day suddenly seemed settled the next. The rapid progression fueled even more speculation. Had the decision been planned for longer than anyone realized? Were deeper strategic considerations driving the process? The lack of clear answers only intensified the intrigue. Within palace corridors, inside allegedly described the development as historic, not because of the numbers involved, but because of what it represented. For some, it signaled the growing influence of a future king determined to shape the institution before inheriting it. For others, it reflected a broader shift toward prioritizing future generations over long-standing arrangements. Either way, few disputed the significance of what had just occurred. Yet even as supporters quietly celebrated and critics voiced concern, a larger storm was already gathering. Decisions of this magnitude rarely occur without consequences. Powerful interests had been affected. Established expectations had been challenged. And while the transfer itself marked a dramatic turning point, many insiders believed the most explosive chapter had not yet begun. Because once word of the decision started spreading through royal circles, emotions began running higher than anyone anticipated. But transferring the funds was only part of the story, because the reaction inside royal circles proved even more dramatic. The news spread quickly through royal residences, private offices, and trusted circles. Reactions ranged from disbelief to quiet celebration. Some saw the move as bold leadership, Others viewed it as a direct challenge to established traditions. Either way, the monarchy suddenly found itself facing a defining moment. Almost immediately, the decision became the only topic anyone seemed willing to discuss. What had begun as whispers hidden behind private meetings now dominated conversations throughout royal circles. Advisors exchanged opinions. Courtiers compared interpretations. Senior figures who had remained silent during earlier stages of the controversy reportedly found themselves forced to choose where they stood. The transfer had done more than alter financial arrangements. It had exposed divisions that had been quietly developing beneath the surface for years. According to insiders, reactions among courtiers were deeply divided. Some viewed the move as a powerful demonstration of leadership from a future king willing to make difficult decisions in pursuit of long-term stability. They believed William had acted with clarity at a moment when uncertainty threatened to overwhelm the institution. Others were far less enthusiastic. Critics reportedly worried that established traditions were being challenged too aggressively, and that precedents once considered untouchable could now be vulnerable to change. Those disagreements quickly spread beyond advisors and administrators. Reports suggest that senior royals themselves began viewing the situation through very different lenses. Some allegedly interpreted the decision as a necessary step towards strengthening the monarchy's future. Others questioned whether the speed and scope of the move risked creating unnecessary tensions within the family. The result was an atmosphere filled with uncertainty, where every conversation seemed to carry political significance. Meanwhile, support for Catherine reportedly continued growing. Throughout the controversy, she had remained closely associated with discussions about future generations and long-term planning. As details surrounding the children's trust circulated through royal circles, many observers increasingly connected the development to priorities she and William had reportedly championed together for years. For supporters, the decision appeared to validate that vision. For critics, it raised even more questions about how influence was shifting within the monarchy. Outside palace walls, public interest began accelerating at remarkable speed. Speculation flourished as observers attempted to understand what the reported transfer truly meant. Every rumor generated fresh debate. Every new detail inspired another wave of questions. The story had expanded beyond internal royal discussions and become a national conversation about leadership, inheritance, and the future of the institution itself. The more people learned, the more fascinated they became. At the heart of that fascination was a growing sense that the controversy extended far beyond one decision. Attention increasingly turned toward future financial policies and what other changes might follow. If long-standing arrangements could be reviewed and potentially restructured, what else might eventually come under examination? Supporters described the possibility as modernization. Opponents feared it represented the beginning of a much larger transformation. Either way, uncertainty continued to grow. Perhaps no one found themselves in a more difficult position than King Charles. According to palace whispers, he faced competing pressures from every direction. On one side stood those advocating continuity and caution. On the other stood voices emphasizing reform and long-term planning. Every development seemed to place additional weight on his shoulders. Observers increasingly viewed him as a figure caught between past and future, tradition and adaptation, loyalty and responsibility. As reactions intensified, it became clear that the transfer itself was no longer the central issue. The real struggle now revolved around what the decision represented. To some, it symbolized a monarchy preparing confidently for the next generation. To others, it signaled the beginning of a profound shift in power and priorities. And as opinions continued colliding behind closed doors, one question grew impossible to ignore. Everyone was debating the present, but very few could predict what would happen next. As opinions clashed behind the scenes, one question remained unanswered. What would this mean for the future of the crown? For George, Charlotte, and Louis, the implications could be enormous. What began as a financial controversy was now evolving into a conversation about legacy, responsibility, and the next generation of royals. The trust was no longer simply a fund, it was becoming a symbol of the future William hoped to build. As debates continued across royal circles, attention gradually shifted away from conflict and toward possibility. The questions dominating conversations were no longer focused solely on what had changed, but on what those changes might eventually achieve. For the first time since the controversy began, discussions about the future carried a sense of optimism. Behind the tension, the uncertainty, and the fierce disagreements, many observers began seeing something larger taking shape, a long-term vision centered on the next generation. For Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, that vision carried enormous significance. According to those following developments closely, the reported trust represented far more than a financial arrangement. It was increasingly being viewed as a framework designed to support future responsibilities while providing stability in an institution often defined by pressure and expectation. Every generation of royals inherits traditions, obligations, and public scrutiny. What made this moment different was the growing belief that preparations for those challenges were beginning much earlier than anyone expected. Supporters of the reported changes argued that the benefits could extend well beyond financial security. Discussions surrounding educational opportunities quickly became part of the broader conversation. Some insiders suggested that long-term planning had always included investments in preparation, leadership development, and charitable engagement. The goal, they claimed, was not simply to protect future heirs, but to equip them for the extraordinary responsibilities that would eventually come their way. Charitable initiatives reportedly became another important part of the narrative. Those close to the discussions described a vision in which future generations would not merely inherit titles, but also inherit meaningful opportunities to contribute. The trust increasingly came to symbolize service rather than privilege alone. That distinction resonated with many observers because it aligned closely with the public image William and Catherine had spent years cultivating. Responsibility, not entitlement. Purpose, not prestige. Throughout the controversy, Catherine's influence remained impossible to ignore. Reports consistently linked her to conversations about stability, long-term planning, and family-centered priorities. While others focused on immediate disputes, she was often described as concentrating on the future impact of today's decisions. That approach helped strengthen the perception that the reported trust was not merely a response to current circumstances, but part of a broader strategy designed to provide continuity for years to come. Meanwhile, public fascination continued growing. The more people discussed the trust, the more symbolic it became. What had once appeared to be a technical financial issue was now being interpreted as a statement about the monarchy's future direction. Supporters saw hope. Critics saw transformation. Even neutral observers acknowledged that the story had evolved into something much larger than anyone initially imagined. The trust had become a symbol of changing priorities inside one of the world's most closely watched institutions. Perhaps that symbolism explains why the controversy remained so powerful. Financial arrangements can be altered, policies can change, structures can evolve, but symbols carry a different kind of weight. They shape perceptions. They influence expectations. They create narratives that often outlast the events that inspired them. In the eyes of many, the reported transfer now represented a future-focused monarchy preparing for the next chapter, rather than clinging exclusively to the past. Yet despite the growing optimism surrounding those possibilities, unanswered questions still lingered. Certain details remained hidden. Certain conversations remained private. And just when many believed the story had reached its conclusion, whispers began circulating about one final development. According to insiders, information was emerging that would force observers to reconsider everything they thought they understood about the controversy. What seemed settled was suddenly becoming uncertain once again. But before the dust could settle, a final revelation would emerge, one that changed how many viewed the entire controversy. In the end, this story was never just about money. It was about power, priorities, and the future direction of the monarchy itself. What began as whispers behind palace doors had evolved into a defining moment, one that may be remembered as the day William signaled exactly what kind of king he intends to become. As the controversy slowly moved from breaking headlines into royal history, a larger picture began to emerge. The financial debates, the private meetings, the competing loyalties, and the growing tensions had all pointed towards something much deeper than a dispute over resources. Beneath every discussion stood a fundamental question about leadership. What kind of monarchy would emerge in the years ahead? What values would define it? And who would ultimately shape its future? Those questions transformed what initially seemed like a temporary controversy into a defining test of vision and purpose. For many observers, William's actions offered a revealing glimpse into his approach to leadership. Throughout the entire saga, reports consistently portrayed him as someone focused less on preserving the status quo and more on preparing for the decades ahead. Rather than concentrating solely on immediate challenges, he appeared determined to strengthen foundations for future generations. Supporters viewed that mindset as evidence of strategic thinking. Critics questioned aspects of the approach, yet few disputed the message it conveyed. William seemed increasingly willing to make difficult choices if he believed they served a larger long-term goal. At the center of that vision stood a delicate balance between duty and family. For generations, royals have often struggled to reconcile personal responsibilities with institutional obligations. This controversy appeared to place those competing priorities directly alongside one another. What made the situation unique was the growing perception that William no longer viewed those responsibilities as separate. According to supporters, protecting the future of the monarchy and protecting the future of his children had become part of the same mission. Catherine's influence also emerged as one of the defining themes of the story. Throughout every stage of the controversy, her name remained closely connected to stability, planning, and the future well-being of the next generation. While public attention often focused on conflict and controversy, many insiders continued emphasizing her role in supporting a vision built around continuity and responsibility. As a result, her influence appeared stronger than ever by the time the dust began settling. At the same time, the controversy highlighted broader changes taking place within the monarchy itself. Institutions survive by adapting, and this episode suggested that adaptation was becoming an increasingly important priority. Long-standing assumptions were being examined. Future challenges were being anticipated rather than merely reacted to. New generations were becoming central to discussions that once focused primarily on the present. Whether supporters welcomed those developments or critics resisted them, the direction of travel seemed increasingly clear. The children's trust became the lasting symbol of that transformation. Beyond financial considerations, it came to represent preparation, continuity, and long-term thinking. For George, Charlotte, and Louis, the trust was increasingly viewed as a bridge connecting today's decisions to tomorrow's responsibilities. For the public, it became a symbol of a monarchy attempting to secure its future before circumstances forced change upon it. And for William, it may ultimately be remembered as one of the clearest statements yet about the values he hopes will define his reign. Perhaps that is why the story captured so much attention. It touched on questions that reach beyond one family or one institution. It spoke to the challenge of balancing tradition with progress, loyalty with responsibility, and present needs with future obligations. Those themes resonate because they are universal. They reveal that the greatest decisions are rarely about money alone. They are about legacy. And while the palace may never publicly reveal every detail, the message behind this extraordinary decision was impossible to miss. The future of the crown had just become the highest priority of all. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.